So the Eightfold Path is very important. It's seen as, if you embody these 8 principles, if you will, I'm going to call them principles, then you are on the path to enlightenment, and you're following the same path that Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism and the Buddha himself, would follow. And I think that actually these are a lot easier to discuss because they're quite clear as to what their main thrust is and their intention, and it's a sort of virtue ethic in a sense. And I think that's it's a fairly reasonable attempt at trying to encompass lots of aspects of human life that people get wrong as well. It's a sort of practical focus to it.
Yeah.
And the first one, I'm going to just read the translated versions because I don't want to speak any more foreign words and embarrass myself. But the first one is right view, which is just having a clear understanding of reality. And that means and encompasses understanding and accepting the Four Noble Truths regarding suffering, as in you understand that suffering is inevitable, but there is a way of overcoming it, more or less, or struggle, if you will. And this also involves recognizing the law of karma and the impermanence of all phenomena, as in the inevitability of change. Or if you're taking a Hindu view, that this world is not real. But we're not talking about that because it's silly.
I'll reserve my questions and criticisms after you do the list.
Well, so some Buddhists think that.
Yeah.
That's not real.
Mm-hmm. But I think it'd be good to go through each point individually.
Okay. So, to accept I'm reading that as you must accept the Buddha's interpretation of reality, not an empirical version of reality, because you can't accept the world as it is and then also believe in reincarnation.
But the Buddhism is explicitly about, so you have what are called bodhisattvas, which are basically, it translates to like those who are attaining wisdom or knowledge or whatever. So the Buddha, he said, I am, all Buddhism means is basically gnosis. But Buddha means gnosis. A Buddha is one who's attained gnosis, right?
Right, okay.
So a bodhisattva is obviously trying to attain gnosis, and he says, there will be many, many Buddhas after me. I've just found this path. That path will then disappear and be rediscovered over and over again. So this is kind of the eternal aspect of and universalistic aspect of Buddhism. Some schools say everyone is able to attain the Buddha. Others say they're not. So it's not theistic.
Mm-hmm.
As Josh said, it's more of a system of virtue ethics.
Yeah, there is a bit of debate as to whether or not Buddhism is a philosophy or a religion, because of course I've been to the shrines in Japan where they do depict Buddha as some kind of deity. So there is a splinter.
That would be
a
form of sort of Zen Buddhism, if you will. That's quite popular.
I would conceptualize it as more. It bears some parallels to Greek polytheism rather than Abrahamism.
Well, I can sort of see a few links to when you said virtue ethics. I can see the metaphysics of Buddhism with reincarnation as a little bit adjacent to Platonism. Mm-hmm. But then one of the questions I had, and this is why I remain skeptical of it, is that as far as I've understood from reading the sort of Stanford summary of Buddhist thought, there was an assertion Buddha made that there is no core self. So how does an individual be reincarnated and that individual track across reincarnations if there is no core self of each individual?
Because do you want?
No, you go ahead. It's fine.
So yeah, it's basically it's like the opposite of a Platonic form. So the forms are fluid, basically. There are forms, but they're always in flux.
Right.
And they're always changing. So you have the Dharma, obviously, which is essentially your body, soul, if you like. That's what reincarnates. And that goes through progressions, roughly speaking. I'm generalizing here, but every lifetime, the Siddhartha Gautama, originally the story, the traditional story is that many, many lifetimes before Siddhartha Gautama, the body he was in at that stage went to a priest and said, I want to attain nirvana, he said, you will be reincarnated as Siddhartha Gautama in 1,000 lifetimes or whatever. And that's the traditional story. So it's sort of more a spiritual progression where you reincarnate not into only human form, but animal form as well. And sort of the deeds you do lends to Dharma, basically. And then
it's sort of like the karma you acquire in life determines the nature of your reincarnation.
So is that bodily soul individuated from the life essence of the universe, which is a sort of disaggregated consciousness by the fact that it is in the entropic impermanent world, and then the goal is through enlightenment to return that energy to the
samsara is the permanent world.
Yeah.
Nirvana is basically ultimate consciousness.
Right.
You can perhaps compare it with gnosis, or the Greek gnosis, or Jewish Kabbalah, where the ultimate stage is unknowable unitary consciousness from which everything comes from. The Hindus call it Maya.
Right.
So
is it reunion with it's either Brahma or Brahmin? I can never remember which one's the ultimate one.
Sorry, Maya is the illusion. Brahman is the ultimate consciousness. It's the unitary consciousness, the all, basically the one, if you like it, or the monad. Yeah,
so this is where those are my contentions with that particular bit. It's that, okay, you must have an integrated view of reality, but that's non-verifiable. So that's just one standard that doesn't quite vibe with me. And then it's difficult to conceptualize. It's not difficult to conceptualize now that you've explained it, but the consistent self that iterates across lifetimes. There is a you, but the goal is to stop being you and reabsorb yourself into nirvana, the broader permanent spiritual consciousness thing. That's one sort of sticking point I have. But
yeah, well, I mean, this is something that I obviously don't agree with. I don't believe in reincarnation, so it's something that I would not necessarily say is a strong suit of Buddhism, because it's a very unique thing to the East as well, isn't it? There aren't, you get every now and then sort of an isolated tribe outside of the Eastern world that might believe in some form of reincarnation, but in sort of the Northern Hemisphere, it's a rare belief to have outside of that. And I think that carry
on. I've got something to say there. But,
no, you go ahead, actually.
I personally do believe in reincarnation. And as did, Northern pagans. So it's worth not thinking it as a self, but more, the self is a product of the ego, basically, which is a mundane thing.
What do you mean by that?
So the self is me, right? I, yeah. Mm-hmm. Whereas whatever's animating that self is apart from the self, in a sense. But there's a connection between it, which we'd call energy or chi, as the Chinese do, or some kind of like vital force, right? I don't know for Buddhism specifically, because I'm only well-versed, not particularly well-versed, but I only really know the Vajrayana school, which is the Tibetan Tantra, the more esoteric stuff. However, it's very difficult for the Western mind to sort of separate the idea of self from soul, I think.
Yeah. Well, because the aspect of the individuated soul is where the self comes from. This is my break from the Buddhist tradition. That's why I just sort of can't buy in, I suppose.
There's also something that I wanted to pick up on before I move on to the next point. And you mentioned sort of deification. And I think it depends on the school in which you're talking about. So the Theravada, which sticks more closely to the original teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, it's more likely to revere Buddha and not many others, although quite often, because they're pretty laissez-faire, you might have a Theravada temple, you might have other deities because other sects of Buddhism pray there, but or meditate there, whatever they're doing there, right? Whereas some of the other ones may have a sort of pantheon, as you said. There's a sort of polytheism to it, although even calling it theism seems a bit strong, doesn't it?
That's why I said parallel. It's to do with cosmology. So Theravada thinks that there's only one world, and one Buddha, whereas Mahayana, for example, thinks there's multiple worlds, multiple Buddhas, and they're a lot more likely to worship bodhisattvas as deities, not in the sense of gods, but more like, you can kind of say like a Jungian archetype.
They're kind of like patron saints, aren't they?
Yeah,
in a way, in that you have a specific saint that represents a certain virtue towards a path towards a higher ideal and toward becoming closer to a sort of higher power.
There's a little bit of that in Nara in Japan, because they've got this great palace with this colossal Buddha statue in the middle of it, but around the gates and in the four corners of the palace there are these different demigod style statues, all with weapons and different faces. They almost look like Dark Souls bosses. That's the first thing I thought. If I've got photos, I'll send them to whoever's editing. And they're subordinates to the Buddha, and I think they represent the winds, so they're almost like pagan totems, but they're still correlative to Buddha.
Well, there are archetypes, there are aspects of divinity, right?
Right.
All of which is represented by Buddha. Not Buddha the individual, but Buddha, as I said, the ultimate archetype. For example, in Thailand, Theravada, which is more about, and again, a generalization, all of this is like a massive pie chart.
There's a lot of variation,
You will have, like, in the temples, specific priests who are there, their whole life purpose is to be a bodhisattva. And basically they'll be supported by members of the community. There will be like pillars of the community as would a pastor in a church or whatever. Whereas in Mahayana nations, it's a lot more inclusive, like everyone sort of, it's a less exclusionary process.
So it's the difference between almost like Catholic and Protestant.
Guess so, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I would represent it slightly differently than that, but I'll get onto that a bit later.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.